Stop playing nice. Start playing smart. The architecture of power. Mechanisms of control. The world is not divided into the good and the evil. It is divided into those who dictate terms and those who serve as the material for their fulfillment. If you still believe that your decency, honesty, and readiness to cooperate are your strengths, congratulations. You are the ideal prey. For a social predator, your empathy is merely an interface through which it is convenient to upload viruses of submission. You are not a player. You are scenery in someone else's script. While you wait for justice, others study your neurochemistry to understand at which exact second your prefrontal cortex will capitulate before fear or the thirst for approval. We are not here to make you better. We are here to expose the mechanisms of your enslavement and teach you to use them against those who consider you a resource. Welcome to the reality where intelligence is the only form of power and morality is only a tool for the manipulation of the weak. Chapter 1. The Trap of Reciprocity and the Illusion of Consent Phase. The collision. The office on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper in the city of London was flooded with cold, sterile light. Thomas sat opposite Arthur, feeling the collar of his shirt begin to constrict his throat. Thomas had come to ask for a well-deserved promotion. For 3 years, he had been a team player, filling the gaps left by others and believing that his loyalty was a form of currency. Arthur had been silent for 30 seconds. In the world of high strategy, silence is not the absence of sound. It is a vacuum that sucks the confidence out of the victim. Arthur did not look Thomas in the eyes. He slowly, almost ritually, examined his fingernails. His pupils were constricted, a sign of extreme concentration and the absence of sympathetic activation, fear. I have prepared a report on the results for the quarter. Thomas began, and his voice betrayed him with a slight tremor on the final syllable. Arthur looked up. His face remained motionless, like a mask of white marble. Your report, Thomas, is a statement of facts that have already occurred. I am not interested in the past. I am interested in why you believe that your goodness gives you the right to demand the resources of the company. Arthur makes a micro-movement. He leans forward slightly, invading the personal space of Thomas. In psychology, this is called dominance expansion. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. His brain, trained for social adaptation, frantically searched for a way to diffuse the situation. He smiled. A weak, pathetic smile, which in ethology is called a submissive grimace. I simply thought that we were working as one team. Thought, please confirm that I am valuable. Tell me that my efforts were not in vain. A team is a biological euphemism for a hierarchical pack. Arthur cut him off. You are not on the team, Thomas. You are in the queue for disposal. Phase, psychological X-ray. What is actually happening here? Thomas is making a classic mistake. The projection of reciprocity. His brain is operating on an oxytocin-driven expectation. I was good to you, therefore you must be good to me. But Arthur is a social predator. He uses the gaslighting of efficiency. He does not deny the facts. The report of Thomas is indeed good. He devalues the very coordinate system in which these facts hold significance. The neurochemistry of the process. When Arthur falls silent, Thomas experiences a sharp release of cortisol. The brain perceives social exclusion as a physical threat. To reduce the level of stress, Thomas begins to ingratiate himself. This is the fawn response. the fourth stage after fight, flight, or freeze. He attempts to regain the favor of the aggressor by surrendering even more power. Arthur applies cognitive suppression. He knows that in a state of stress, the prefrontal cortex of Thomas, responsible for logic, shuts down, handing over control to the amygdala. In this state, Thomas cannot negotiate. He can only plead for mercy. Phase: psychological precedent. The behavior of Thomas perfectly illustrates the experiments of Solomon Asch on conformity, 1951. In these studies, subjects were asked to compare the lengths of lines on cards. All other participants were Confederate actors and intentionally gave the wrong answer. In 75% of cases, the subjects agreed with the obvious lie simply to avoid opposing the group. Why? Because the fear of social exile is embedded in our reptilian brain. For primitive humans, exile from the tribe meant death. Thomas is currently in the laboratory of Arthur. He sees that his merits are being ignored, but instead of defending his reality, he adapts to the reality of Arthur. He plays the good guy, hoping that the group, represented by the boss, will not expel him. But in the world of power, the one who agrees with a false definition of their value signs their own death warrant. Phase: counterstrike. If Thomas had stopped playing good and started playing smart, his strategy would have changed fundamentally. Instead of filling the silence with excuses, he should have used the mirroring of deficit. Lesson number 1. Your value is not in what you have done, but in what cannot be done without you tomorrow. To seize the initiative, Thomas should have 1. Accepted the vacuum. Withstood the pause longer than Arthur. This demonstrates a high threshold for stress resistance. 2. Broken the script. To the question, why do you believe you have the right? He should have answered a question with a question. Arthur, are we discussing my past achievements or the cost of my replacement on the market in the next quarter? 3. Radical pragmatism. Shifted the conversation from the plane of relationships to the plane of resources. The rule of power: never appeal to justice. Appeal only to benefit and the fear of loss. Phase: sensory immersion. The air in the office feels dry, scorched by air conditioners, with a slight aftertaste of ozone and expensive perfume with notes of vetiver. Outside the panoramic window, London resembles a giant microchip where millions of human pixels scurry about in search of approval. The ticking of the exclusive watch on the wrist of Arthur sounds like a metronome at an execution. Every tick is a second during which Thomas loses his status. The metal and glass around them whisper, "There is no room for warmth here. Only the person capable of becoming as cold as this interior survives here." Listen carefully. If you thought that power is when you shout the loudest or bang your fist on the table, you are stuck in development at the level of a leader of a monkey troop. Real power is when you make the enemy feel safe next to you. You must learn to be weak where you are strongest. We are moving to the second principle, which will shatter your perception of honesty. Chapter 2. False vulnerability and the pratfall effect. Phase: the collision. An evening at the private club, the Gilded Cage. Semi-darkness, the smell of expensive tobacco, and the heavy aroma of old whiskey. Julian, a vice president of a large hedge fund, sits in a deep leather chair. He is used to being feared. Opposite him is Clara, a young analyst who has been with the company for only 3 months. Clara looks depressed. Her shoulders are slightly slumped. She fidgets with the edge of a napkin. Her voice is quiet, almost strained. "Julian, I I made a terrible mistake in the calculations regarding the deal with Apex, she whispers, without looking up. If the board of directors finds out about this, I am finished. I do not know why I am telling you this. Perhaps because you are the only one who understands the structure of this market. Clara pauses. Her hand trembles slightly as she reaches for her glass. This is controlled micro-anxiety. Julian straightens up. His ego inflates like the hood of a cobra. He feels a surge of power. Before him is not a competitor, but a broken girl who has come to Daddy for protection. Calm down, Clara. His voice becomes patronizing. Tell me the details. I will see what can be done. Thought. Now I have you in my pocket. You owe me. And I will find out all of your weak spots. What Julian does not see is that the mistake in the calculations was planted by Clara intentionally. It is bait. She has just gained access to his personal attention and forced him to reveal his cards regarding the Apex deal, which he had previously kept hidden. Phase. Psychological X-ray. Clara applied one of the most dangerous techniques. Strategic vulnerability. Why did it work? 1. The dopamine hook of superiority. When someone confesses a weakness to us, our brain receives a powerful surge of dopamine. We feel smarter, stronger, and more important. At that moment, critical thinking shuts down. Julian stopped analyzing Clara as a player and began to perceive her as an object of guardianship. 2. The pratfall effect. Social psychology asserts that perfect people provoke suspicion and rejection. However, if a competent person demonstrates a small weakness or makes a mistake, their attractiveness and the level of trust toward them increase sharply. 3. The neurochemistry of oxytocin. The sincere, as it seems to Julian, confession of Clara triggers the production of oxytocin, the hormone of trust. His brain marks her as one of his own, safe. This is a biological hack. She opened the door to his mind using a master key made of tears. Phase. Psychological precedent. In 1966, psychologist Elliot Aronson conducted an experiment. Subjects were asked to listen to recordings of interviews with people applying to participate in a quiz bowl. The first candidate answered all questions perfectly. The second candidate answered perfectly. But at the end of the recording, he could be heard accidentally spilling coffee on himself and swearing. The result? The subjects rated the second candidate as much more likable and trustworthy. Perfection is frightening. A mistake makes you human. Clara used this scientific fact. She spilled coffee on her reputation in the eyes of Julian to hide the fact that she is the most dangerous predator in the room. She used his narcissism against him. Phase. Counterstrike. If you want power, you must stop acting like Mr. Perfection. This only creates a desire to undermine you. Lesson number 2. Show the enemy a wound so that they do not notice your dagger. Your actions. 1. Choose a safe weakness. It should be something that will not destroy your career, but will make the other person feel like an expert. Ask for advice in an area where your opponent considers themselves a god. 2. Listen more than you speak. When a person begins to teach you, they reveal their methods of operation, their values, and their fears. This is a goldmine of information. 3. False capitulation. In an argument, it is sometimes useful to admit the opponent is right in the small things. They will relax, decide they have won, and it is at that exact moment that you can strike at the main issue. The rule of power. The one who seems the most defenseless usually controls the situation. A real wolf does not growl. It whimpers until it is at the throat of the prey. Phase: sensory immersion. The club smells of old leather and masculine arrogance. The ice in the glass of Julian clinks quietly. It is the sound of his relaxation. The light of the lamps reflects in his eyes, in which a condescending pity can be read. Clara sits in the shadows. Her face is half hidden, like that of a poker player who already knows they have a royal flush. The silence here does not press. It envelops like a sticky spider web. Julian thinks he is the spider. He does not notice that he is merely a fly that has been allowed to feel like the master of the web for a few seconds before dinner. You think that information is gold. You are wrong. Information is merely ammunition. Gold is the vacuum into which you lure the enemy. The most terrifying weapon is not what is said, but what is left unanswered. When you remain silent, people begin to talk to themselves. And in this internal monologue, they confess everything to you without even opening their mouths. Chapter 3: Information Vacuum and the Terror of Uncertainty Phase. The collision. 3 days have passed since the meeting at the club. Julian sat in his office, staring at the monitor screen. He was waiting. He was waiting for an email from Clara. He was waiting for a call, a text message, a timid "thank you," or a panicked "what should I do next?" But Clara disappeared. She was in the office. He saw her in the hallway. She walked past, barely nodding, with a face as cold and focused as that of a surgeon before an operation. No trembling in her hands, no false vulnerability. Julian began to twitch. His brain, accustomed to control, began to generate catastrophic scenarios. Has she found another patron? Did she set me up, using that mistake as a smokescreen? Does she know something that I do not know? At lunch, he could not stand it anymore, and entered her department himself. "Clara, we need to finish yesterday's conversation regarding Apex," he snapped, trying to give his voice an air of authority. Clara slowly raised her eyes from the documents. She remained silent for exactly 5 seconds. 5 seconds in psychology is an eternity. It is enough for Julian to feel like a schoolboy called to the board without having done his homework. "Julian," she said in a flat, emotionless tone, "now is not the most appropriate time. I will inform you when I am ready to discuss the details." She lowered her gaze again. She did not ask. She stated a fact. Thought of Julian. She is informing me. Me? What is she planning? A cold lump of anxiety began to stir in his chest. He had just handed her the right to define the time and place of their interaction. Phase: psychological X-ray. Clara applied a radical information vacuum. Our brain is a machine for predicting the future. For survival, it is vital for us to understand the intentions of those around us. When we encounter an absence of feedback, the amygdala, the center of fear, is activated. The mechanism of destruction, one projection of fear. In a vacuum, a person begins to fill the void with their worst fears. Julian is a manipulator. Therefore, he expects manipulation in return. He is building a torture chamber for himself out of his own suspicions. 2. The Zygarnik effect. The human psyche strives to complete any unfinished action. The unfinished conversation with Clara hangs in the working memory of Julian, burning his mental energy. He cannot focus on anything else. 3. Inversion of hierarchy. The one who asks questions or initiates contact is often in the position of the supplicant. The one who cuts off contact and remains silent automatically becomes the decider. Phase: psychological precedent. In 1975, psychologist Edward Tronick conducted a famous experiment called still face. The mother first plays with the infant, smiles, and reacts to them. Then, at a signal from the researchers, she suddenly makes her face absolutely motionless and devoid of emotion. The reaction of the infant is terrifying. At first, they try to attract attention, smile, and gesture. But after a couple of minutes, without receiving a response, the child falls into a state of deep stress, begins to scream, turns away, and demonstrates signs of psychological collapse. Julian is that same infant, only in an expensive suit. Clara turned off the emotional face. She stopped reacting to his status, and this deprived him of his footing. Adults lose their minds in exactly the same way when their social signals disappear into the void. Phase. Counter-strike. If you want to drive the enemy insane, stop fighting them. Simply stop existing in their field of vision. Lesson number 3. Your silence is a mirror in which the enemy sees their own demons. How to play smart. 1 pattern interruption. If excuses are expected from you, remain silent. If aggression is expected, be pointedly polite and brief. 2. Dose your presence. In a world of excess information, scarcity is the highest price. Become a scarce resource. Let them fight for your attention. 3. The gray rock method. If pressure is applied to you, become as uninteresting as a gray rock. No emotions, no hooks. The aggressor will quickly burn out, trying to strike a spark from something that does not burn. The rule of power. The one who has less need for an answer is the one who dictates the terms of the deal. Phase. Sensory immersion. In the office, the servers hum, a low, monotonous sound that in the silence feels like the roar of an approaching storm. Julian hears his own breathing, and it seems too loud to him. The air smells of ozone and overheated plastic. The screen of his telephone is dark, like an abyss. He looks at the closed door of Clara. The matte surface of the glass hides the truth. He feels as if he is standing on the edge of a cliff in a thick fog. 1 step, and he will either fly or crash. And the most terrifying thing is that Clara is the one who holds this fog in her hands. When you make a person wait, you create a void. Now, when you fill that void with someone else, you create panic. Humans are social creatures. We define our value through the exclusivity of access to a resource. If you are the only one who can give the enemy what they need, they will hate you. But if they see that you can give it to someone else, they will begin to idolize you. Chapter 4. The shadow of the third and the triangulation trap phase. The collision. Thursday arrived. Julian entered the cafeteria of the business center, hoping to accidentally intercept Clara. His internal monologue had turned into a continuous chain of self-flagellation and suspicion. He saw her in a far corner. No, she was not alone. Sitting next to her was Mark, his main competitor from the risk department, a man who was aiming for the same seat on the board of directors as Julianne. Clara leaned toward Mark, whispering something. A light, almost intimate smile played on her face. She raised her gaze for a second, met the eyes of Julian, but did not look away in embarrassment. She merely raised an eyebrow slightly and turned back to Mark, laughing loudly at his joke. Julian felt bile rise in his throat. His body temperature jumped by a degree. His brain instantly filled in the picture. She is handing him those calculations. She has teamed up with my enemy. She is going to destroy me. Clara makes a micro-movement. She lightly touches the hand of Mark. This is the anchoring of attention. She knows that Julian is watching. At this moment, She is not communicating with Mark. She is training Julian. Phase: psychological X-ray. Clara is using triangulation, the creation of a psychological triangle where she controls the flows of information and emotions between two opponents. What is happening in the head of Julian? One, social exclusion. The brain perceives this as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex is activated, the same zone responsible for the reaction to a burn or a wound. 2, reactive jealousy. This is not about love. It is about territorial instinct. Julian perceived Clara as his prey or his tool. Seeing her with another, he experiences a collapse of ego. 3, the enemy of my enemy. Cognitive bias. Julian is certain that since Clara is with Mark, it means they are against him. This forces him to act impulsively. He is ready for any deal just to return her loyalty. Phase: psychological precedent. In 1954, psychologist Muzafer Sherif conducted the famous Robber's Cave experiment. He divided a group of boys at a camp into 2 teams, the Eagles and the Rattlers. Initially, they did not even know of each other's existence. But as soon as Sheriff introduced an element of competition for resources, an instantaneous and fierce enmity arose. The groups began to hate each other simply because the other had appeared. Clara has created a camp in miniature. She has made Julian believe that Mark is a rattler who will take everything. In this state, Julian stops thinking like a strategist. He thinks like a soldier in a war. And in war, people make mistakes, obeying the orders of the one who promises salvation. Phase: counterstrike. The one for whom others fight always possesses more power than those who are fighting. Lesson number 4. Never be the sole source of a solution. Create the appearance of a queue at your door. The technology of interception. 1. Creation of an imaginary alternative. Even if you do not have another job offer or another ally, act as if your calendar is booked for a month ahead. People want what others already want. 2. Demonstrative rejection of exclusivity. When a partner or boss begins to pressure you, mention, as if in passing, that other departments have also shown interest in this methodology. 3. The principle of scarcity. A resource that is available to everyone is cheap. A resource that must be fought for is priceless. The rule of power: become the prize. The prize does not run after the players. The players kill each other to touch the prize. Phase: sensory immersion. The air in the cafeteria smells of over-roasted coffee and cheap plastic trays, a sharp contrast to the aroma of Clara's expensive perfume, which reaches Julian like a sentence. The sound of their laughter cuts his hearing like a razor blade on glass. The cold metal of the cutlery in his hands feels heavy, almost impossible to lift. The world around him narrows to a single point. 2 people who, it seems to him, are whispering about his downfall. He feels naked in the middle of an icy desert, and the only warm cloak is in the hands of Clara. Did you think that negotiations are a search for compromise? Leave those fairy tales for kindergartens. Negotiations are the capitulation of one side before the superior will of the other. When your opponent is frightened, disoriented, and lonely, as we have done with Julian in the previous chapters, they do not seek benefit. They seek deliverance from pain. And now you will learn to strike exactly at the point where the pain becomes unbearable. Chapter 5. Radical pragmatism and the point of no return phase. The collision. The evening of that same Thursday. The office is almost empty. Julian bursts into the office of Clara without knocking. His tie is loosened, perspiration has broken out on his forehead. He is no longer the alpha of the hedge fund. He is a man who is drowning and sees a single straw. "Clara, enough games." His voice sounds hoarse. "I saw you with Mark. I know he wants to undermine me at the board meeting. What did you tell him? How much do you need for you to give those calculations to me and not to him?" Clara did not even raise her head. She continued to slowly turn the pages of a contract, making notes with a thin fountain pen. The scratch of the pen on the paper in the silence of the office sounded like the scraping of a knife on bone. Clara applies tactical ignoring. She demotes the status of Julian to the level of intrusive noise. "Sit down, Julian," she finally said, without looking at him. "You are talking about money?" "Money is boring. Everyone in this building has money. I need your signature." She pushed a sheet toward him. It was not a report on the Apex deal. It was an internal order regarding the transfer to Clara of full control over the operations department and her personal guarantee, which made Julian legally responsible for any of her future mistakes. This is suicide." Julian exhaled. "If I sign this, I effectively become your hostage." Clara finally looked at him. Her gaze was empty, like that of a deep-sea fish. "You have a choice. Either you sign this and I fix that error in the reports that you allegedly made, or tomorrow Mark will present the board of directors with evidence of your incompetence. Choose. Be my partner on my terms, or be unemployed with a destroyed reputation by 9 in the morning." Julian froze. His hand reached for the pen. At that moment, he hated her more than anything in the world. But his fear of losing status was stronger than his hatred. Phase. Psychological X-ray. Here, Clara uses the most powerful mechanism of the human psyche, loss aversion. How it works. 1. Asymmetry of perception. Research shows that the pain of losing $1,000 is twice as strong as the joy of receiving the same amount. Julian is not thinking about what he might gain. He is paralyzed by the horror of what he might lose. His seat, his bonus, the respect of his colleagues. 2. Cognitive dissonance. To justify his humiliation, the brain of Julian will begin to lie to itself. It will say, "This is a strategic alliance. I am simply buying time." This is a psychological defense mechanism that allows the victim to come to terms with enslavement. 3. False dilemma. Clara narrowed his world to 2 options, although there are always more. But in a state of acute stress, tunnel vision does not allow Julian to see the exit. He sees only the signature or the collapse. Phase. Psychological precedent. This effect was best described by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in their prospect theory. In one experiment, participants were asked to choose between a guaranteed receipt of $500 and a 50% chance to receive $1,000. The majority chose the guarantee. But when the situation was flipped, and they were offered a choice between a guaranteed loss of $500 and a 50% chance to lose $1,000 or nothing, people began to take risks, trying to avoid the loss. Clara placed Julian in a situation of guaranteed loss of his future, unless he took a risk now by signing the paper. She forced his brain to work against itself. He makes an irrational choice because he is biologically programmed to fear a minus more than he values a plus. Phase. Counterstrike. If you want to dominate, you must be able to create a situation for the opponent where any choice they make is your victory. Lesson number 5. Do not offer a deal. Offer deliverance from a catastrophe that you have constructed yourself. Your strategy: 1. Isolation of choice. Remove all intermediate options. Leave only black and white. 2. Amplification of pain. Before offering a solution, describe in detail to the enemy the consequences of their refusal. Force their brain to live through the moment of their disgrace. 3. Radical pragmatism. Cast aside emotions. You do not need to be loved. You need their signature to be where it benefits you. Power is not when you are listened to, but when they have no other choice but to obey. The rule of power. Morality is a luxury for those who sit in the stands. Those who are on the field know victory justifies any means because history is written by the winners. Phase. Sensory immersion. The office smells of cold tea and printer ink. The shadow from the lamp on the desk of Clara cuts the face of Julian in half, one side in the light, the other in complete darkness. The sound of his breathing becomes intermittent. When he takes the pen, the metal feels icy, as if he is touching the gravestone of his career. Outside the window, the lights of the city flicker, soulless and distant. The office turns into a hermetic capsule where time has stopped. There is only this sheet of paper, this signature, and the cold, waiting gaze of the woman who has just bought his soul for the promise not to destroy him tomorrow morning. Have you ever wondered why people who have been betrayed often become the most loyal dogs of their tormentors? This is not Stockholm Syndrome in its pure form. It is the mathematics of survival. When you have forced a person to commit a shameful act to save their skin, you have not just bought their loyalty, you have rewired their personality. Now Julian is not just a colleague of Clara, he is her accomplice. And complicity is a glue stronger than any friendship. We move to the 6th principle. How to turn an enemy into a tool. Chapter 6. Guilt inversion and the neurochemistry of betrayal phase. The collision. Julian released the pen from his trembling fingers. The ink on the document had not yet dried, but he already felt as if his skin had been stripped away. He looked at Clara, expecting a triumphant smile. But she did not even look at the paper. She looked directly at him, and in her eyes there was not joy, but demand. Excellent, Julian. The first step toward your salvation has been taken, she said coldly. But the signature is not enough. Mark has already begun digging under you. So that the board of directors does not listen to him tomorrow, we need Mark to fall silent today. Forever, in a professional sense. Julian swallowed. What do you mean? You have access to his cloud storage for the Apex project. I know that you shared passwords when you were still friends. You will go in there and upload a file that I will give to you. It is internal correspondence, which implies that Mark was taking kickbacks from contractors. Julian froze. His brain exploded with horror. This is no longer just manipulation. This is forgery, a criminal offense. I cannot. This will destroy his life. He is my friend, Clara. Friend? Clara smirked, and the sound was like the cracking of ice. Your friend is currently drinking whiskey and discussing with the HR director how best to frame your dismissal. You have already signed the paper, Julian. You are already in my boat. If I go to the bottom, you go first. Do this, and you will become untouchable. Refuse, and you lose everything right now. Thought of Julian. I have already lost. If I do not do this, the signature on that document will ruin me. I am simply defending myself. Phase. Psychological X-ray. Clara is using cognitive dissonance and the sunk cost fallacy. Psychological mechanism. 1. Destruction of the moral compass. As soon as Julian signed the first document, he violated his principles. Now his brain is trying to eliminate the discomfort. Since I have already done something bad, it means I am not such a good person, and one more bad act will not change me. 2. Transference of aggression. Julian hates Clara, but he cannot oppose her. She is too strong. Therefore, his brain redirects this rage toward Mark. He begins to convince himself that Mark is the one truly at fault because he forced him to act this way with his betrayal in the cafeteria. 3. The neurochemistry of submission. In a state of chronic stress, serotonin levels drop and dopamine begins to be produced only in response to a promise of safety. Clara is the source of his stress, but she is also the only path to its cessation. Julian becomes dependent on her approval, like an addict on a dose. Phase. Psychological precedent. One cannot help but recall the Stanley Milgram experiment, 1961. Ordinary people were ordered to give electric shocks to another person, an actor, for mistakes in tests. The voltage rose to a lethal 450 volts. Despite the screams of the victim, the majority of participants continued to press the button because a person in a white coat, an authority, said, "The experiment requires that you continue." Why did they obey? Because responsibility was shifted to the authority. Julian is doing the same thing now. He tells himself, "It is not that I am bad. It is that Clara is forcing me." This allows him to do monstrous things while maintaining the illusion that he is still a good guy who has fallen into trouble. Phase. Counterstrike. Power is the ability to make others burn bridges behind them. Lesson number 6. If you want loyalty, force a person to betray their ideals for you. How this works in life. 1. Gradual involvement. Never ask for a large betrayal immediately. Start with a small favor that slightly violates the rules. 2. Creation of a shared secret. A secret that can destroy both parties binds more tightly than any contract. This is called mutual incrimination, or the black bond. 3. Deprivation of an alternative. The person must believe that there is no way back, that the world of decent people is closed to them, and you are their only ally in the world of shadows. The rule of power. Clean hands only belong to those who build nothing. You do not need friends. You need those who cannot afford your downfall. Phase. Sensory immersion. It becomes stifling in the office. Julian feels the smell of his own sweat, sticky and sour. The light of Clara's monitor reflects in her glasses, turning her eyes into 2 white, empty discs. The silence no longer presses. It hums in his ears like high-voltage wires. When Julian takes the flash drive from her hands, his fingers momentarily touch her cold skin. This touch feels like a brand to him. Outside the window, the siren of an ambulance rushes past, a distant, plaintive sound that reminds him of his own conscience, which is falling silent somewhere very deep. He leaves the office, and his steps on the carpet sound soft, like the gait of a beast that has gone out to hunt not of its own will, but by the command of hunger. Victory is not the finale. It is merely the moment when you have stopped running and begun to dictate the direction. You have seen how a person breaks under the weight of their own conscience. You have seen how easy it is to turn a decent professional into a frightened accomplice. If at this stage you felt pity for Julian, close this text. You do not belong here. You are a resource. If, however, you felt a cold satisfaction from the precision of the mechanism that was triggered, congratulations. You are ready for the final lesson. We move to the top of the social food chain, the creation of your own reality. Chapter 7. the architecture of reality and the triumph of the will phase. The collision. Friday morning. The boardroom of the board of directors. The air smells of freshly brewed coffee and expensive perfume. But for Julian, this smell is mixed with the aroma of formalin. He feels like a dead man. On the main screen is that very evidence against Mark that Julian uploaded during the night. Arthur, the head of the company, slowly scrolls through the slides. The face of Mark, sitting in a corner, is whiter than chalk. He has just been led out of the hall under guard. Incredible, Arthur says, shifting his gaze to Clara. If it were not for your vigilance, Clara, and the courage of Julian, who noticed these inconsistencies in time and reported them to you, we would have lost millions. Clara sits perfectly upright. She's wearing a dark blue suit that emphasizes her status as a defender of the structure. She does not triumph. She looks concerned for the well-being of the company. It was our duty, Arthur, she answers in a calm, deep voice. Julian demonstrated exceptional dedication to the cause. It was difficult for him to expose a friend, but his loyalty to the principles of the company proved to be higher than personal sympathies. Clara makes a micro-movement. She nods slightly to Julian. This is public encouragement. In the eyes of the board of directors, she has just handed Julian a portion of the glory, but in reality, she has placed a golden collar on him. Now his heroism is a legend that she created, and which he is obligated to maintain so as not to follow Mark. Julian tries to smile. His lips tremble. He looks at Arthur, at Clara, at the empty chair of Mark. He understands. The truth no longer exists. There is only the version of events that Clara is now weaving into the history of the company. Phase, psychological X-ray. Clara has reached the highest point of dominance. Impression management and the construction of social proof. How it works. One gaslighting of the group. Clara did not just set Mark up. She forced the entire leadership of the company to believe in her version of reality. She used the halo effect. Since she saved the company from a traitor, it means all of her subsequent actions will be perceived as noble. 2. Cementing the hierarchy. By handing Julian the status of a hero, she deprived him of the possibility of ever speaking out against her. Any word from him against Clara will now look like madness or black ingratitude. She turned his guilt into his public image. 3. The neurochemistry of triumph. Clara's levels of testosterone and serotonin are at their peak. This is the state of the winner, which is read by others at a non-verbal level as charisma and leadership. In contrast, the brain of Julian is in a state of learned helplessness. He no longer tries to fight. He simply performs the role that has been assigned to him. Phase, psychological precedent. The most striking example of how social roles and an imposed reality suppress the personality is the Stanford Prison Experiment by Philip Zimbardo, 1971. Ordinary students were divided into guards and prisoners. In only 6 days, the guards turned into sadists and the prisoners into broken slaves. Why? Because the system, the reality, created by Zimbardo, dictated the rules of the game to them. Clara created her prison within the framework of the office. She assigned the roles. Mark is the criminal, Julian is the repentant witness, and she herself is the judge and savior. The psyche of the participants adapted to these roles so tightly that they themselves began to believe in the truth of what was happening. This is called the Lucifer effect, when the environment forces a person to completely abandon their self for the sake of a given function. Phase, Counter-strike. Real power does not fight for a place in the sun. It becomes the sun itself, around which the others revolve. Lesson number 7. Do not participate in other people's games. Create your own rules and assign the guilty parties in them. Final strategy. 1. Capture the narrative. The one who is the first to voice a version of events owns the truth. Use information noise to hide your tracks and present the enemy in the necessary light. 2. Public mercy. Be kind to your tools, as Clara is to Julianne, in front of everyone. This makes you invulnerable to criticism. How can she be bad if she supports her subordinates so much? 3. Elimination of tracks. When the goal is achieved, destroy all the bridges that led to your intervention. In history, only an inevitable sequence of facts should remain. The rule of power. Morality is a glue for the weak. For the strong, only expediency exists. You have stopped playing the good guy. Now you are playing the smart guy. And that means you have won. Phase. Sensory immersion. A solemn silence reigns in the boardroom. The air conditioners silently push icy air, purified by filters to a state of sterility. A ray of sunlight falls on the polished surface of the table, reflecting in the eyes of Clara with a cold, steel brilliance. Julian feels the hand of Arthur resting on his shoulder, approvingly in a fatherly manner. But Julian looks only at Clara. She almost imperceptibly adjusts the cuff of her blouse. The sound of the cufflink fastening reminds him of the click of handcuffs. The world outside the window seems bright and alive. But here, inside this glass tower, everything is frozen in the permafrost of her will. She did not just win the battle. She became the author of this reality. This project is not just the story of one office coup. It is the exposure of a social mechanism that works everywhere, from family dinners to the boardrooms of the United Nations. We have finished dissecting the case of Clara and Julian, and now it is time to draw the final line under your training. Your main mistake until this day lay in the belief that the world reacts to merit. That is a biological lie. The world reacts to signals of dominance and the control of resources. Clara won not because she was smarter than Julianne in mathematics. She won because she was psychologically freer. She was not limited by the framework of a good person. While Julian tried to preserve his face and friendship, Clara studied his neurochemistry of fear. Your main takeaway. In any social system, you are either the architect who builds the cages or the tenant who pays rent with your time, nerves, and resources. There is no third way. As soon as you choose to be good, to the detriment of being smart, you voluntarily enter the enclosure. The psychological investigation is complete. Now you do not see people, but rather the vectors of their fears and desires. You do not see words, but rather the micro-expressions of submission and aggression. Remember, knowledge of these principles is a loaded weapon. It does not make you evil. It makes you protected. But if you decide to pull the trigger, do it with the cold calculation of Clara. Empathy is a luxury of winners, which they allow themselves in the time free from hunting. Knowledge of the mechanisms of the psyche is your primary freedom. Subscribe so that together we may explore the hidden facets of human behavior. And be sure to write in the comments which psychological pattern or strategy we should analyze next time. Let us search for the truth together.